All right, time for an update and forecast on the Shelly fire. Now, I'm going to do this a little different than yesterday. I'm going to do a separate video for the lake fire just because there's lots of different tabs I'm going to show today. We're going to go through the mapping, the weather forecast, the incident action plan, all kinds of stuff. So I just thought it'd be simpler for everybody, including myself, if I separated the two fires into different videos. So this is the Shelly fire. We did have some growth on it yesterday. Just to kind of get our bearings here, here's Greenview over here, Mugginsville up to the northeastern parts of the fire. And then if we zoom in here, you can see Kidder Creek Adventure Camp down there. And then looking up, you can also tell right off of the bat why this is a pretty difficult fire. We have some very steep topography. Fire likes to go uphill because it's able to preheat the fuels above the fire, evaporate the moisture, and then by the time the fire gets there, the fuels are just ready to burn. It's also been very hot, very dry. Winds haven't been as big of a factor recently, but we may see some more unstable conditions this afternoon than what we have had in previous days. There was definitely growth on the fire yesterday, but you could say we kind of lucked out in a way. There was almost so much smoke produced the day before that it reduced fire activity yesterday. You see this happen on a fire sometimes where there's so much smoke that it doesn't allow as much surface heating throughout the morning and afternoon hours. So then that inversion, which is like a cap on the atmosphere, just stays in place. And then that makes it so there's less strong winds in the afternoon, less mixing, less oxygen being supplied to the fire. Basically, a simpler way to say that is when you have a lot of smoke over your fire and it stays there all day long, less sunlight can come through, heat things up, and it ends up limiting fire activity. So that was kind of what happened yesterday on the fire, but if we actually want to see what happened, oh wait, I think these are labeled incorrectly. All right, there we go. I was wondering why that looked weird right there. All right, so that is the Shelly fire, just using the mapping from July 7th. And then if we got the mapping, I believe they did this at about 10 p.m. last night. That's going to be our new growth that we had yesterday. So I do notice it looks like on the western side of the fire right here, looks like it would be backing down the hill right there. And that's one of those situations where you typically will have backing in the overnight hours. And that has been something that's happened on this fire. Is up in these higher elevations, it's remained very dry overnight. So you're able to get some of that fire activity happening even in the overnight hours. Usually when you're backing downhill, though, it's not as intense as if you're going uphill in the middle of the afternoon where it's the hottest, driest, windiest time of the day. Clearly, most of the growth was on the northeastern section of the fire. Could just take a little wide view so you can, again, see. So let's just focus over here, see what happened. It does look like it's now kind of slumped over this ridge and a little bit on this side as well. So we may start to see it back down here when the next mapping comes out, because if this is our mapping from 10 p.m. last night, then last night it might have started to back down this hill as well. And it does look like we have a lot of fuel in here. I think my concern at this point would be if it then spots down here, then it could start to go uphill faster during the daytime hours when it's hot, dry, and you're in alignment with the topography. So again, there's Kidder Creek Adventure Camp. Zooming in here, just one last view of the changes since yesterday. Not as much growth as there could have been, again, because that inversion stayed intact. So now let's just check out what the fire actually looks like right now. So I'm recording this at about 10:30 in the morning, and there's some smoke coming off of the fire right now. So some nighttime activity, because it's been very dry in those higher elevations, even during the overnight hours, allowing that fire activity to continue. But again, I mean, the smoke kind of helped us out actually yesterday because our winds weren't strong enough to just blow all of the smoke out of the area. So again, it just sat over the fire. That inversion stayed in place, and we ended up seeing less activity than if that inversion lifted. And it's almost like opening the damper on a chimney. I think that's the best way to explain an inversion lifting. But looking at the Shelly fire, we got some new numbers here. Over 6,000 acres now, 0% containment, and anywhere where you see the red, that's where you have some evacuation orders in place, which means you have to go. Yellow is where you have evacuation warnings. I never go over those in these videos because by the time you're watching, they might have changed. But just looking at the mapping, I do like to see where we are seeing more of the activity recently. So anywhere where you see the red, that's going to be where you had some heat. And it kind of matches up with the Google Earth imagery we're looking at, where it was that section on the, southwestern side of the fire where it looked like it was backing down the hill, and then also on the northern side and the eastern side of the fire right here. Next, so red is your more recent growth. Yellow is going to be where your older heat detections were. Next, we can throw on structures, which is why I'm concerned about this fire, is because we do have these structures over here we're looking at. You can actually check it out on the Google Earth imagery. So there's the fire, and then you have green view right down here, and then you're looking up at the fire up here. Now, if you want a silver lining, one piece of good news is that during the overnight hours, we end up getting better humidity recoveries down here, and it also doesn't look like there's as much fuel. Whereas in the higher elevations, it's staying dry overnight, so that's why we've had some active overnight activity. So we got some structures to the northeastern side of this fire. I believe that is one of their top priorities right now. And I'm actually interested to measure this out real quick. So let's get our distance. Roughly, we'll go from roughly the edge of the fire right there to, I want to back out here so it looks like some structures start right about there. That's about 2.2 miles. So, that's close-ish, but, we didn't see as much growth on the fire yesterday. And, we'll talk more about the weather forecast in a second about whether that inversion will be lifting today and we'll see more activity. Right now, I just want to show fire history along with the current perimeter because you can see how it appears to have impacted the fire growth so far, where we have the 2017 Wallow fire, and where we had that, you notice I want to turn off these brights. I just want to go perimeter only. There, that's a little bit easier to see. See how it bumps into the old burn scar and then stops in its tracks? Sort of. That could be for two reasons. One is that this Wallow fire in 2017 cleared out enough fuel that when the fire bumps into that burn scar, there's just not enough fuel, so then the fire stops. The other thing that we sometimes see on fires is that they actually reuse the containment lines that they used in a previous fire, where you get some dozers in there in 2017, maybe you have some fuels growing back, but then it's easier to kind of get some new lines in there. Then we have the 2014 log fire to the north of the Shelly fire. What is a bit concerning, though, is the lack of fire history between the Shelly fire and all of our structures over here. I would say if there's anything I'm concerned about, it's that aspect. I would love it if we had a big burn scar between there, but unfortunately, we don't. So we've looked at topography, certainly steep in this area. We could tell that on the Google Earth imagery right here. We have dry overnight conditions. We have a lot of fuels that have built up over decades. And then we also have a pretty challenging weather forecast. Now, before we get to the weather forecast, just want to see what it looks like right now. Yeah, it looks like we have that inversion again. You see how that smoke has settled down. That means you have some calm winds. Doesn't look like there's as much smoke as yesterday, though. So I'd be surprised if we don't see the inversion lift this afternoon, because that'll warm up the surface enough where that warm air becomes less dense, it rises up, breaks apart that inversion, and then you get a lot more mixture in your atmosphere, air moving around, pushing the fire with it. Resources assigned, we've seen this number jump up. I believe the last number I'd seen was 945, so we added on another 500 personnel. The last dozer number I saw, I think, was 22, and now we're up to 34 there. So great additions there. They do have a number of different lines that they're planning on putting around this fire. I think the better resource for that would maybe to watch Zeke Lunder's videos. He has a lot more experience in that field. My, maybe you could call specialty, would be meteorology. That's what I do. And for my day job, I'm a weatherman. So we'll just get into the forecast now. Where right off the bat, just want to show that we still have very hot conditions across California. That purple is the excessive heat warning, orange is the heat advisory. Warm air can hold more moisture, so when it's hot, you usually are also very dry, and we've certainly seen the impacts that has had on the fire. I want to copy and paste the latitude and longitude of our fire. Let's throw it into windy, and we'll just zoom in here. And it looks like we are going to have some winds picking up in the afternoon. So you see how that shading gets a little bit more orange. And it's also coming from the northwest. So that's actually something that we were a little bit confused about yesterday, because they were saying we were going to have down canyon winds in the afternoon. And that didn't make sense to me, because usually you have up canyon winds in the afternoon, because up the canyon it heats up more, you got rising air, and then the winds rush up the canyon to fill in that low pressure. So yesterday I was thinking, okay, so it must be just like the prevailing wind direction that is causing the down canyon winds in the afternoon. And that is the case. I was listening to, I think her name is Julia Rutherford. She's the incident meteorologist on this incident. She's saying it in the valleys over here, it heats up a lot more. You're in the triple digits most likely today. So then you get a lot of rising air over here, and then you have air rushing in from the west to take its place. So that's why we can get some winds rushing down the valley instead in the afternoon instead of your normal up valley winds. You also just typically have northwesterly flow in California, especially when you have a ridge. So that's the other factor that's leading to the northwesterly winds that we're going to see in the afternoon. So what that would do, and the reason that's important, is because northwesterly winds are going to try to push this fire kind of basically in the same direction it has been moving, which is north, east, south. Not so much. It would actually be helpful to click back where the growth was yesterday. It's a pretty good proxy, that might be the word I'm looking for where the growth is going to be today. The good news, at least on this side, is that now, actually on both sides here, is now it's going to be trying to move downhill, and fires don't move downhill as quickly as they do uphill. So hopefully we have some slower growth there. Definitely expecting more growth along the, what would that be, eastern edge of the fire. And then I'd say my biggest concern is that we get some spotting down here, and then it would be able to rush up the slope during the afternoon hours. So that's our winds. Now we can actually check out the incident action plan for some more details here. Thought this was interesting. Control objectives: north of Salmon River Road, south of Scott Bar, east of Scott River, Ranger District boundary, west of Whiskey Butte. And just because that's the control objectives doesn't mean the fire won't stop before those areas. And then this is, again, Julia Rutherford. She's a great incident meteorologist. So I highlighted a few things here. We don't want to read all of this. Looks like dry and unstable conditions continue to persist. It's definitely hot. It's dry. Those down canyon winds beginning mid-afternoon. We already talked about that, but I thought that was interesting. Weather for today, hot and dry with very unstable conditions in the afternoon. So unstable is kind of a word people usually don't like, but basically what it means is that there's the potential for more vertical mixing in the atmosphere, which leads to more winds, which can lead to more active fire behavior. Maximum temperature, upper 80s along ridges, and then triple digits in the valleys. Relative humidity, that's a big concern on this fire. It's extremely dry out there, 9 to 13%, 14 to 18% along the ridges. So when your air is dry, your fuels are dry, and then it's just easier for the fire to spread because it doesn't have to waste its energy evaporating the moisture out of the fuels. By the time it gets to those fuels, they're just ready to combust. Kidder Creek drainage, actually I just highlighted the winds just because it seemed like those were the same everywhere, about up to 20 miles per hour possible late this afternoon. When your fuels are as dry as they are, you don't need as strong of winds to lead to rapid fire spread. But we could maybe view this as a silver lining. 20 miles per hour isn't too bad, especially considering, some of the winds we could have maybe later in the summer or as we get into fall, where you get those downslope windstorms where you have 50 to 60 mile per hour winds. But again, that is still strong enough to lead to some active fire behavior. And then Julia says valley inversions. She's expecting them to lift late morning. I'm kind of expecting that as well. The smoke just doesn't look as thick as it did yesterday. So that would mean more active behavior this afternoon. And then right there, Tuesday night, maximum relative humidity around 25 to 30% slopes and ridges. So that's what I was talking about, where we're not getting a lot of moisture recovery overnight. So instead of the moisture going back into the fuels, they're just remaining dry. So that's bad for two reasons. One, it allows the fire to continue overnight and then back down some of those hills. Two, without moisture recoveries overnight, when you get into the afternoon, the fuels are already dry and then they dry out even more, and that leads to some active behavior. Now, one thing I highlighted for Wednesday is it looks like we're expecting some windier conditions, 25 to 30 miles per hour. So I might actually be more concerned for Wednesday's forecast than I am for today's. But then we also have a wild card in the long range forecast, potential for isolated thunderstorms Friday and Saturday. I say we just cross that bridge when we get to it. I don't want to spend too long worrying about that just yet. I think we have enough going on. So in general, another critical fire day. Environmental conditions are in place that support large fire growth, hot and dry daytime conditions with very low nighttime humidity recoveries, and fuels, where available, will support active fire behavior and rapid rates of spread. And then stay alert for the breaking smoke inversion today. Right now, it doesn't look like there's much activity on the fire. The way we know that is if we go over to CalTopo, we'll just turn off structures, fire history. And if we go all satellites, so those stars are going to be, the red ones are some of the recent activity. That yellow box is going to be where we're getting current heat detections. Not always the most accurate data, but that's not as much heat coming off of the fire as what we had yesterday. So that's sometimes encouraging to see. Sometimes it's just because the satellite's in a bad position and it can't look through the smoke. But right now it looks like minimal activity. But again, once that inversion lifts and we get into the hotter, drier, windier parts of the day, I am expecting this fire to pick up in activity. So I'm definitely going to be watching it. I'll have more updates in the coming days, so stay tuned for that. And hopefully this video was helpful.